A tamare e, ko Mark Treadwell aho. Ke te ora aho I onimana, e rua o Tamahini, Danielle ko Juliana. And my name is Mark Treadwell, and we're talking today about the competencies from here in Onimana, and hopefully this will be of some value to you in terms of understanding the significance of the competencies as we work through this process. So, why the competencies? The competencies are incredibly important for many, many reasons now. And largely that's because of the incredible changes in society over the last 100 years. We can go back to the 1600s, the 1700s, the 1800s, etc. Most people were working in factories of some description, and increasings of the small villages and the small jobs there became a factory orientated by the sort of 1800s. All right? So that process took place over hundreds of years. And then we arrived into the 20th century. And the 20th century, we saw World War II, etc., and we saw the changes in society starting to kick in. Stereotyping was a really big gig for most of that time in the previous sort of 300, 400, 500 years. Suddenly, stereotyping was being pushed aside, and people were actually being able to be much more free. And we had the 70s when everything sort of went ballistic, really, to a degree, and people started actually walking in the streets and demanding different things and wanting changes in how business and how government functioned, etc. It was a time of great change. And that change continued through the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. Then we hit the 2000 mark, okay, the 21st century, and it continued again. And it's got to the point now where in 2020, the world has actually changed dramatically. And our schools now need to change dramatically. The competencies are one of the most important capability sets we can gift to our learners. And we're going to come back to this in a minute, but I just want to do a brief explanation here as well. We have mapped the competencies, and the competencies, there's two groups of competencies. One is the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Education has 5 competencies: thinking, language, symbols and text, managing self, relating to others, and participating and contributing. So they've got 5 competencies there. About the same time, we were working on this similar sort of project, and we came up with 6 competencies, and we said, right, one of the most important ones here was thinking and questioning, managing self, collaboration, communication, and those were our sort of 4 for a while. Over time then, we suddenly realised that we were missing a very, very important competency, and that being identity, and another one being cultural awareness. So we're going back sort of 15 years now, okay? But the new competencies that we've developed are heading up with identity. Identity is a critical concept. Thinking and questioning is a critical concept, managing self, but there's a process of feeding down. So once we've got a sense of identity, then we can talk about thinking and questioning. Once we've got identity and thinking and questioning, then we can start talking about managing self. Once we've got those 3, we can talk about collaboration and build some capacity there. Then we can look at cultural awareness. And then there's a 6th competence, which is communication, which runs through the whole group. Now, we'll come back to this later on and talk a little bit more about this. But what I wanted to do now is actually talk to you a little bit about one of the key capabilities and the key shifts in education. In the past, most of what we did in schools was about remembering knowledge. And we had to do that because, in fact, we couldn't carry around all those books, okay, with us, because books were very heavy, and we had to memorize a whole lot of material. All right? few years later, in the sort of from 2000 onwards, suddenly we had this thing, okay? We had a phone in our pocket, so we could then access knowledge very, very quickly. Now, it's not that we don't have to remember knowledge, but what we can do now is it's not the only priority, because we're shifting from a knowledge economy to an economy that actually requires those skills. The World Economic Forum, you said, here's 10 skills: critical thinking, creativity, people management, coordinating with others, emotional intelligence, judgment decision making, service orientation, negotiation, and cognitive flexibility. Those capability sets are absolutely critical. Okay? So we sort of had to sort of rethink when we looked at the competencies, we had to line up, are we actually taking care of the World Economic Top 10 skills in our competencies, whether that be the Ministry of Education competencies or the Mark Treadwell competencies? Okay, how do we actually build this capacity? Because this capacity now is critical to what we do on a daily basis. So, where are we? Let's come back to looking at concepts. Concepts are around cause and effect. All right? And concepts are everywhere. They're universal, right across the universe, funnily enough. So cause and effect is what we call a concept. So in our sort of talk about learning, we can often start with, well, we need to know some stuff. If we ask questions about that knowledge, we can actually form ideas. Okay, if we can apply those ideas to different contexts, we can form concepts. We can link different concepts together to form a concept framework, and then we can be innovative, and we can actually be entrepreneurial. All right? So our learning process has shifted from knowledge only all the way through to being entrepreneurial. That is a big shift in our thinking as educators. Okay? So what we've done is we've mapped the competencies using what we call concepts. Concepts are this thing we call cause and effect. So concepts are all around us. We have a concept of dancing. Okay, so we have a concept of dancing. Cause, well, actually, there's this great music, and I feel like I want to dance. Okay, the cause, okay, was the music. The effect is I want to dance. Cause and effect. Almost everything we do is a cause and effect. You're listening to this morning or this afternoon or this evening, okay, and that's the effect. The cause is that you wanted to know more about the competencies, okay, cause and effect. Our whole world is around cause and effect. Okay, let's take a simple example that everybody understands, and let's talk about driving. When the parent sitting in the passenger seat for a change and the child sitting in the driver's seat, then the mother or the parent says to the child, right, what we need to do is we need to take our foot off the brake and press it down on the accelerator, nice and gently. Okay, so we do that and we start the car moving forward. And to start with, it's not a pretty sight. Okay, it's not a pretty sight at all because the car's going jump, 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 jump as it moves forward. But then we try that again and again and again. And each time the taking off of the car gets smoother and smoother and smoother. Eventually, we get that differential calculus process of the two taking my foot off the brake and onto the accelerator. Once I do that, and I've done it 7 or 8 times, the brain maps the pattern between the accelerator and the brake and that process. The concept of actually applying the accelerator and taking my foot off the brake. So driving has a whole lot of these concepts. Okay, we have got a concept for roundabouts. We've got a concept for parking. We've got a concept for overtaking. We've got concepts. Driving has got hundreds of concepts embedded in it. Yet when we drive, we are not consciously thinking about the driving process. We are just driving because our brain has automated all those concepts into this massive concept framework that we then do autonomously. It's absolutely fantastic that we can do that. Okay? So we've taken a conceptual approach to this because concepts are quick and easy to learn. Driving the car, do you need to know the history of the motor car? And the answer is, well, no, not really. But if teachers were driving the process here, we would probably start off with the history of the motor car, the safety of the motor car, etc., etc. And we'd do a lot of background knowledge, which actually we don't actually need in order to drive the car. So we need to be a lot more critical around what the concepts are that we want to actually work with. And so a lot of the knowledge-orientated learning is now being replaced with conceptual learning. Because once you have a concept, you can then make predictions for other contexts. So if you do roundabouts, for example, you do one roundabout, you do a second roundabout, a third roundabout, a fourth roundabout, and then you come to a roundabout you've never seen before, and the brain has mapped the pattern of roundabouts, and you don't even think about it, even though you've never gone around this roundabout before. It's automated the process. And so our brain has this fantastic capability through cause and effect to form concepts and map concepts, and so we can multitask. We are the multitasking kings and queens of this planet. We do it really, really well. Exceptionally well, and it's why we've dominated the entire planet, is because of this capacity of human beings to take concepts through cause and effect and actually apply them without actually thinking about them. So we can multitask. So, giving you an idea now that the concepts that underpin the competencies allow us then to learn much more quickly and effectively. So units of work in the competencies take roughly 2 hours. Okay, so 2 hours, and we can actually do a unit of work on one of the competencies. We can take identity, and we can take one of the concepts within the identity and unpack that and work that through in an hour, and I'll talk more about that later on. So, the World Economic Forum, top 10 skills: critical thinking, creativity, people management, coordinating with others, emotional intelligence, judgment and decision making, service orientation, negotiation, cognitive flexibility. So here the World Economic Forum is saying, here are some key capability skills we must have in order to move forward. And these are the skills that everybody uses now on a day-to-day basis. Whether you're 5 or 55, it doesn't really matter. Okay? We will use these capability sets on a daily basis. And it's a very, very powerful process. Okay? So our critical skills, our Economic Forum top 10 skills, great, fantastic. Okay? We've sort of changed and said to them, right, okay, here we go. Let's take those and look at what they look like in terms of the competencies. And we looked at identity, thinking and questioning, managing self, collaboration, communication, and cultural awareness. And that was in the work that we did as an outside process. The ministry has thinking, symbols, language, and text, managing self, relating to others, and participating and contributing. You can choose either group here. Okay, it doesn't really make a lot of difference. Okay. Personally, I think the ones that we've developed are probably a little bit more useful, and we've also mapped each of the competencies within the competency framework. Okay, so what we want from here then is to ask ourselves, there are two bits of work that underpin what we call agency, and we hear lots of talk about agency, but agency is only possible if the learner has a understanding of the learning process and also has an understanding of the competencies. So those two things linked together develop something which is called agency. Okay, so you can't give agency to a child, they have to build capability. And the capabilities come through the learning process and the competencies. Okay, so the competencies, which we've already talked about, okay, have different levels of time to actually get them established. So if we look at the work that we've done, we've got the identity, thinking and questioning, managing self, collaboration, communication and cultural awareness. But these are not equitable. They're not all going to take the same amount of time. Identity, understanding our thinking and self-talk and about what we're talking to self about on a daily basis is incredibly important. Okay, so we have to unpack this notion of identity and work our way around that. Once we've got our identity sorted, and that will take about 40% of the time, then we'll start talking about thinking and questioning, because once you have a sense of identity, then we're doing this thinking stuff, and then we're questioning my thinking to see whether I'm actually thinking in a sense that actually is valuable to us and others, etc. Then we've got managing self. Okay, you can only manage self once you've got a sense of identity and thinking and questioning. So there's a sequence going through here. Once you've got identity, thinking and questioning and managing self, then we can collaborate. Okay, once we've got collaboration, we can then start communicating. Once we've got identity, thinking, questioning, managing self and collaboration and communication, we can then look at and push through cultural awareness. So we've got 6 different competencies, but each one has a different amount of time associated with it. Okay, so we go from 40% for identity, 25% for thinking and questioning, 15% for managing self, collaboration's 10%, cultural competency is 10%, and communication is a vertical stream that goes through the competencies. Okay, so we're doing communication all the way through. So the resource that we've produced has these language frameworks as well, because we want to understand that in fact there's this superficial sort of process, there's a deep understanding, and then we've got this profound notion. Okay, so the resource has the language frameworks in there because we need a language to go with the competencies. So the big chunk of the resource talks about that language and how we build that language with our young people. And once again, that depends on the age of those people that we're working with. All right. So the other thing we need to look at here, this resource breaks down each competency across 5 developmental levels. So we look at the competencies, and then we look at the competency frameworks, and you'll see this in the text. Okay, and from the competency frameworks, we start to look at each individual competency. Okay, and that will start out with starting out, funny enough. Okay, so we start with starting out, then we build confidence is the second stage. Third stage is connecting. Fourth stage is understanding deeply. And the 5th stage is predicting with confidence. And you'll see this in the sample of the document that you can download using the URL below. And it gives you a sort of a framework then to see where are we at. And so for our 5-year-olds, they're probably going to be looking at starting out for a year, year and a half, maybe 2 years. Okay, then we can start building confidence. Okay, in our year sort of 3, 4s, connecting 5, 6s. Okay, understanding deeply 7, 8s, and predicting with confidence 9, 10. It doesn't actually work like that in practice. Okay. But that's the architecture. How you apply that is up to you. Okay, So that's really important that you get that right, so to speak. All right. So there is a sequence to the competencies, and we talked about that earlier, and there's the micro lesson. The micro lesson is a 2-hour lesson where we will deal with a competency, a specific competency from the group that we have in the resource. And there'll be a prompt. The educator will have a prompt, and they'll say, look, here's this amazing thing that's just happened, or a video which here, or this object we have. And we get the learners to then reflect individually. We then get them to work in groups of 3, optimally 4 sometimes, okay, but 3 to 4. And then they share what they have experienced, okay, in their conversation to the rest of the class. So they're starting to become teachers themselves. And we want them to have this capability. We want them to actually take much more ownership of the learning process itself. So they share with the class, and after that the teacher then synthesizes that and goes, right, so here's one context for this particular competency concept. Okay. So once we've got one, that's all very well, but we've only got one context, and so the brain can't map the pattern yet because it hasn't seen other contexts. So stage 2 of the learning process for the competencies is that each group chooses another context, and they go away and work on that context, and then they come back to the rest of the class and share to all. And so we give them, roughly speaking, about 10 to 20 minutes to start off with the prompt and the reflection, etc., for the one context. And then we allow them the remaining time, usually about an hour and a half, okay, to go away and work on their particular new context. And you'll have to give them the contexts to start with. So you need to be prepared for that. And in the resource, you'll see that that's all present there for you. Okay, and to find the prompt and share to all will take, roughly speaking, about an hour and a half. So we've got this 2-hour process. And generally speaking, we tend to do this in the first thing in the morning when they're fresh and sort of ready to go. And we need to actually build these competencies regularly. So we try and do 1 or 2 per week to build the competency. That's how important now the competencies have become. All right. So we've got this micro lesson that actually provides that capability. So in summary, what we've got here is that we've got to start thinking about our learning through concepts, cause and effect, that we want them to actually build competence, whether you use the ministry's competencies or the Mark Treadwell competencies, that's up to you, okay, but they're quite similar, okay, but the breakdown of that is actually in more detail in terms of the resource that we've provided to go with the competencies. You can download the resource sample and you can go to www.bit.ly/2yvcqo and you can go and work that one out later on. And you'll see it in the below in the where the pictures are. So the competencies are critical, absolutely critical, and we want our young people to make sure that they have these capabilities. Because the world they're going into is incredibly sophisticated, and unless we actually give them some capabilities around the competencies, they're going to really struggle with the world that they are going to go into. So thank you very much, and I hope this has been of some use and value. For more information, you can look online at marktreadwell.com. Also, you can actually drop me a line via email, and it's just a very simple email address, just mark@work.co.nz. Okay, so if you want to make contact, feel free to do so. So, right, that was a bit of a race, and I look forward to catching up with you again, hopefully next year at ULearn, when we actually physically all in the same room. That would be pleasant. Nice to think about. Alrighty, thank you very much, and all the very best.